Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and big updates are arriving for the expansion of The War Within. We got the patch 11.05, but also potentially a release date for future updates. As our players have begun to look over the horizon, trying to make some guesses as to what else could we be getting for future seasons of The War Within expansion. One of the big features of this expansion has been the return of allied races, starting with the Earthern, though unlike Battle for Azeroth, which confirmed that you will have future allied races down the line, they never really did this for this expansion, either because that's all we're getting for allied races, which would be very disappointing, or they're trying to keep them secretive and hidden until the right date. But players are definitely always on the lookout to play some new options and level brand new characters, and adding more great options to play within War Within would definitely be a waste. So I wanted to go over some of the fan favorite expectations as to which allied races they would want to see in the future out of this expansion. And I wanted to combine all of those fan favorite allied race ideas in one single video. As always, if you guys want to see more discussion videos like these for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. I don't think it's surprising for anybody to say the Haranir are probably going to be one of the future allied races for this expansion. The Haranir are a very enigmatic race. When you first meet them, you don't really get to know them at all because they're all about secrecy. And even as you are amassing armies of the Earthern, the Arathi, and the Nerubians against Xalatath, as well as Queen Ansarek, even then the Haranir, there's an opportunity for them to join in the fight, but they still choose not to. And that secrecy is, I think, what keeps them mysterious and potentially even interesting. The Haranir are connected to a place called Rootlands, which was data mined as potentially, initially, maybe, the original 5th zone of this expansion. There's even a book that describes the Rootlands. Some players found it, and it basically talks about the Rootlands being essentially the world's, one of the very first world trees out there, a gift from Elune to Eonar. But when planted, as this tree started to grow, it got destroyed by one of the titans. The root of that world tree remained hidden underground where the tree survived. The Rootlands is probably a very, very real place because there's a peculiar set of roots between Hollowfall and Ashkahet, which players discovered a while ago as well, near one of the Haranir encampments. And as you fly up, you see that there's a cavern and it looks like it leads somewhere, but when you get too close, you just get put back on the ground. There's a reason why it's not letting you go further, and that's most likely where the Rootlands as a zone is going to be. The Haranir themselves also drew a lot of attention from the players ever since they were revealed during the testing days of the War Within, but more importantly through some of the promotional material for the launch of the new expansion. But Haranir are displayed prominently in the promotional material, which makes you think that they're probably going to be a prominent faction later down the line, which could potentially involve them joining the Alliance or the Horde as a playable option. And based on the models and animations, they're basically Night Elves, more or less. But it sounds a little boring. They're like a modified version of Night Elves, but they have their own unique set of customizations, such as those quills, as well as fur and vine options. Plus, potentially, if the Haranir were to become a playable race, they can be druids, as seen from some of the storylines early on into Ashkahet. And when you get new druids, you get new druid forms. Kind of like how we got some brand new druid forms with the Zandalari and the Kultirans back during BFA. And Kultirans in particular impressed me because of the whole Drustwar witch-like aesthetic, where the forms are not really that of an animal shape, but rather animal bones and animal skulls and twigs and leaves and earth kind of wrapped together to create this form of almost like an undead druidic form in a way. It looks fantastic and it definitely impressed me, and if we're getting Haranir as a viable druid option in the future, one can only wonder what types of feral forms, bear forms, and travel forms they may be able to gain in the future. Now, another fan speculation regarding some of the future allied races we may potentially be able to play in the future is the Ascended Nerubians. When Blizzard first announced the War Within expansion, they also gave us a bit of a glimpse at some of the places we'll go and the factions we'll meet within the World Soul Saga and the very first expansion of that saga. And when showing off the Nerubians of Ashkahet, they made sure to show off the Ascended Nerubians as well. So not only do we have the spidery Nerubians, the scarab Nerubians, flying Nerubians, and a variety of arachnid monstrosity worth of Nerubians, but also a humanoid version of Nerubians, which was the very first time anybody has seen something like that. And a lot of players asked immediately, as soon as they saw humanoid Nerubians, are these guys going to be playable at some point in the future? Is that where we make it a humanoid version of Nerubians? Which got a lot of players wondering if potentially maybe in the future they are to become an allied race, and definitely would be one of the more unique ones. And because they're humanoid, it would be technically easier to transpose some of the different armor types and some of the meshes and textures on a humanoid Nerubian rather than on a proper spidery Nerubian. Plus, they are sorta kinda playable already. If you get one of the specific trinkets from the Delves, you'll have the ability to transform into a Nerubian for a short bit of time, which increases your combat effectiveness. And you'll be surprised just by how many animations these guys have for a good portion of class abilities. But also simple things such as walking, running, swimming, crafting, talking, and a bunch of other miscellaneous animations that a lot of other creatures in the game do not have. Like if you have a toy that transforms you into a Naga, for example, you will notice that they don't have a jump animation or some of the other basic combat animations because in most of the chances they are just going to be an enemy for you to slay within a dungeon or a raid. So it got me thinking that maybe there's something to it because a lot of effort is being put into them specifically. But really, the main aspect that allows a character to become a playable option, however, is based on their mesh for collections. Many technically playable options in the game out there that already exist, things like the Fel Oryx from the Outlands or even the Tonka from Northwind, are basically Tauren and Oryx, but they do not have the meshes required, and thus they are much harder to make them playable because they don't have the requirements needed in order to be able to wear gear and wear armor. And this is what truly allows a type of enemy or type of an NPC out in the open world the potential to be an allied race is if they have meshes done for a lot of different armors and geosets and how those things fit on their character when they wear them. However, if we do see some kind of mesh additions for the Nerubians in the future data mining, then it's definitely possible that eventually we could get them playable. But the fact that Nerubians have had quite a bit of attention put into them in terms of the animations and how they move and how they jump and how they do a variety of different things does make them just a little bit more likely that maybe one day they'll be playable. Now, another suggestion a lot of people had is on the Arathi, and I think the idea of the Arathi themselves is awesome. The whole culture, the buildings, and this whole aesthetic of the Paladin of the Eternal Flame, in my mind, is one of the best parts of the Arathi. Their zone, their architecture, the buildings, and everything they do, the airships, and all that uniqueness that they bring, I am a big fan of, though I kind of doubt that would make him a proper full-blown allied race, because they're basically humans and Kulturans with a slight few customizations. However, I do think that maybe the Arathi customizations could be part of the human and Kulturans at the very bare minimum. You know how we can get the Dark Ranger Night Elves and Dark Ranger Blood Elves? Well, what if Kulturans and humans had their own Arathi customization, mostly those little elfish ears that they have? But maybe if they were to become a Arathi human or an Arathi Kulturan, and maybe if they were to give them like some unique voice lines, like when you're trying to target an enemy, or when the character tells you that your spell ability isn't ready or you can't reach a target. Maybe if those voice lines had a bit of tinge towards the Arathi with like the Arathi accents or some of the Arathi sayings, I think something like that would also be pretty interesting to say the least. Though the game is bigger than just War Within, and for the last few expansions, many players have been wondering what other races and potentially even allied races could they introduce in the near future. Because with expansions such as Battle for Azeroth, we thought that was the end of when they would add allied races. So now it looks like we're going to be obtaining allied races again, and there's a lot of other recommendations from older expansions that could potentially maybe work their way back into some of the factions such as the Alliance or Horde, or potentially become playable by everybody, kind of like the Earthen are. One of the more popular suggestions from a while ago has been, what if we got playable ogres? And that's something the community has wanted to see for quite a while, especially if we got playable ogres for the Horde in particular. Ogres actually, based on some of the interviews, were originally planned to be a playable race for WoW, specifically for the Horde faction, but that idea was scrapped pretty early on. Instead, they kind of turned them into enemies and foes that you would meet in dungeons and raids and out in the open world, and since then they mostly relegated ogres to villains of sorts, with not too many prominent ogres that we can potentially even ally with. And they don't really play a big part in any of the massive world events either, so it'll be weird to kind of just like include them into the world events of the World Soul Saga now as of this moment. Though we did get to see what an ogre empire would look like in Warlords Genre when it was at its peak, and what type of culture ogres could bring during the peak time in history, the gladiatorial culture of ogre champions, as well as the mastery over magic such as the warlock's shadowy fel or the arcanists, and they could wield a lot of power. But they would have to do, I feel like, a lot of build-up to be able to bring ogres back into that spotlight. And that would need to take time, some quests, some lore, and some in-game events. And for me personally, because I played a druid for a good portion when I started playing WoW, I can't look at them the same, because when I see an ogre, I just see a hairless boomkin. So to me, it's just very difficult to just imagine them as a serious playable option. However, I do think there is an alternative to ogres that can still be recruited, at least when it comes to the Horde faction. Not quite full ogres, but I think half ogre, half orc race of the Mok'Nathal would make the perfect candidate as a viable allied race. Basically, imagine a playable Rexxar just for the Horde players. The Mok'Nathal themselves in lore are a tribe of half-breed warlocks that have a lineage to ogres, and the only surviving tribe of them was found way during the TBC era. Rexxar is the only prominent member of the tribe, but he's a fan favorite and has seen plenty of time in the spotlight, especially during the Battle for Azeroth expansion. During the Orc Heritage questline, you actually get to bring all of the different Orc tribes together for the very first Kosharg festival held in Razor Hill. And the Mok'Nathal were invited to join that celebration, which surprised the leader Lerox, because in the old Horde they considered half-breeds like them lesser than true orcs. But he's happy with their inclusion into the festival, and he feels that it might be a time for the Mok'Nathal's isolation policy to potentially end, which helps open up a door to potentially recruit him into the Horde in the near future. Plus, if you modeled all of these half-orcs, half-ogres after Rexxar, they would actually look pretty sweet, but they also would be fairly easy to implement, because Rexxar's skeleton is in fact the same as that of a Kultiran, so it has a lot of the same animations as they do, but the actual physical appearance is a bit modified. One of the reasons why they had a really hard time implementing ogres into a playable options because back in the day they tried to figure out a female version of ogres to add into the game, and they could never really settle on a good example. But I do wonder if it's possible to make some kind of a half-ogre, half-orc females using the Kultiran female skeleton and combat animations, but modify them so they look more like an ogre rather than a Kultiran. Now, another fan favorite for the Alliance specifically was the Sethrak. Many players back in the day, back in BFA specifically, wanted to see playable snake people that live in Vol'dun. They got some cool lore. The Loa sacrificed themselves 16,000 years ago to destroy an old god or a minion of the old god. While it didn't kill him, it did allow Sethrak to imprison the old god for 16,000 years. The sacrifice transformed the Vol'dun from what was originally a dense jungle, very similar to the jungle surrounding Zuldazar, into a barren desert wasteland, which caused all the trolls to leave the area completely, where only Sethrak have remained. After a few years won by one of the Sethrak keepers, Korthek grew power-hungry, sought to free the old god to take over the Zendalari Empire, creating a conflict between the Sethrak that were devoted to their Loa, as well as the faithless who chose to follow Korthek instead. There's given opportunity for the Alliance and the Horde to both assist the Sethrak in their fight against Korthek, which could have been potentially a catalyst to help recruit them eventually as a playable option, or at least attempt to recruit them as an ally as part of your faction. The culture in particular is also really cool because it's all about harnessing lightning, so Sethrak shamans would have been a proper choice. The weapons are shaped from glass, so you would give them a lot of opportunity for awesome heritage items and heritage armor. And they definitely give them a very unique look. So you have an infighting between Sethrak, and they're looking for allies in order to help them in their cause, and it's a potential setup for an allied race, and then all that lore, all that story stuff just stops after you do the main Sethrak dungeon, and that's it. You never revisit them again. It just pauses there and then never picked it back up again. Though technically one of the members of Sethrak does show up as a member of the League of Explorers during one of the Myconid delves, but that's really about it. That is the last time we really see any Sethrak. Their models as well as their animations wise are also would need a little bit more work than, let's say, the half ogres, half orcs, kind of like Rexxar, as they're somewhat stiff at best when it comes to certain animations, and they aren't anywhere ready to become playable. But they definitely had potential during the expansion of BFA, and they definitely had a vocal community behind them at the very least. Now, the final allied race on this list that I wanted to suggest was just a community favorite, just something players would want to see at some point in the future. And after an expansion like Dragonflight, I'm pretty sure literally everybody would love some playable Tuskar. They've been a fan favorite since Wrath of the Lich King, and continues to be that fan favorite throughout the Dragonflight expansion. And they have to be one of the best factions in the game, with a lot of rich lore, a lot of different activities and items you can earn from them, a lot of awesome customizations, mounts, or some of the best mounts in the game. They give you not only movement speed, but also swimming speed, which makes them universally good. And they also have a surprising amount of animations if you do get the item that lets you transform into a Tuskar for a short bit of moment. And by lore, they could essentially be easily recruited as part of a get everyone to help us defy the world threats of the World Soul Saga, because we helped them out back during BFA, we helped them out during Wrath of the Lich King, and I feel like there's more than enough reason for the Tuskar to try to return the favor and maybe even potentially make them recruitable for either the Alliance or the Horde faction. It's unlikely that we will see playable Tuskar for a while though, because they don't have the meshes to support a lot of the armors. Plus, I don't think Blizzard has talked about making Tuskar a recruitable option in any serious matter ever. So it's probably a pipe dream, but a lot in the community love the Tuskar and at some point would want a playable option in the future, even if they're limited by their class choices. But until then, you have Blueberry Muffins on the auction house as your best replacement in order to experience what it's like to play a Tuskar, at least 20 minutes at a time. But with that being said, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope all of you did enjoy it. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community if you want to keep up with regular updates and future builds for the War Within expansion. Also, let me know in the comments below what allied races would you want to play in the future for the War Within. And feel free to be as unrealistic as possible. Like, if Blizzard gave you the option to play as anything you like, what would you play at a heartbeat? Immediately, right this moment, whether it is playable, whether it's not playable, whether it has animations, whether it doesn't, what would you rather play throughout your raids and dungeons within War Within? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.